like I said earlier, the two main visuals you got to really concentrate on are the main item photo and the add to cart button. You know, if that's not hugely apparent from the get-go, you have a problem. Now, obviously, the Sock Thoughts Vapor one is a pretty elaborate version. This is not something we would typically do on your normal product page, but I think for Sock Thoughts Vapor, it absolutely works for his brand to really make sure the illustration complements the product. But even with this, you see that the main product photo is front and center, and the add to cart leaps off the page, that little parchment area. I can't believe you guys made this responsive, JT. I mean, usually you keep this really linear layout here, but it is, so hats off. But the products, the options have always got to be placed above the add to cart. That's a no-brainer. Sometimes we see it below for whatever reason, but the options have always had to be above the cart. Let's go on. And you have to get rid of distracting elements. Earlier we were talking about how that's a key tenet for really layout in general, but it's especially critical for the product page. So the good thing about this product page is the green add to cart definitely dominates, but it has a lot to compete against that, right? So you've got all of this cluttered information. It makes the photo itself really, really small. You have the discount pricing. I'm a big fan of eliminating the left nav where possible on the product page to allow for more of a free layout. So the left nav is just kind of noise competing with all the other information that the customer has to concentrate on. But then you also have the right column. Now, JT, tell me if you disagree. I've never seen a version of a right column that I didn't want to drop kick in the head. You know, I don't like right columns because to me, typically it's paired with a left nav, and it creates this kind of squeeze effect, like those old movie serials where the walls would kind of close in on you with the spikes, you know, and it creates this tension on the product page. And you see what this is forcing to happen here with a small photo, and you have this big New Vita ad and the visit our sales rack. And think about the messaging. Remember we were talking about narrative? Perfect example here, right? So what is the narrative for this page? The narrative needs to be, here's the product, here are the options. Do you want it? Here's how to add to cart. But instead, the narrative is, forget about the current solutions, Ken's product. Here's a New Vita ad. You know, you really need to focus on the New Vita. Visit our sales rack. Forget about adding this thing to the cart. Visit our sales rack. And so that's a perfect example where you have kind of a disparate narrative going on that I think can really affect the conversion rate. What do you think, JT?
I'd agree. And typically, I mean, anytime that we see those right columns, it is ads that are placed in there. You know,
typically.
At least these are static, but you know, I was looking at one earlier this morning. You know, it was like an animated ad, and to me, that's even more distracting. Yeah, so gut that right column altogether.
Well, and what happens so often that I see is, like back in the day, people would have certain width resolutions, right? And as the resolutions increase, they just kind of like added on a right column.
Right.
And I think that's what happened to this store as well. Like the original layout probably terminated right to the right of the add to cart, but they added the right column just to kind of make sense of the wider layout, and it's not always successful. Usually it's not. So let's go on there, dear. For the product page, you first want to, before you design any product page, if you're considering a redesign, if you're looking at your current site in general, this is not a full list, but these are 6 of the most popular elements on a product page, okay? And they're not in any certain order. You have to look if you have a cross-sell, if you have a multiple add to cart. What is a multiple add to cart? That's when you have, basically, do you want fries with that? You have a main item, and you can click certain, usually less expensive items to quickly add to the cart in the same click. And that's what's called a multiple add to cart. Of course, every product page has an item description. Some have recently viewed and related videos, and downloads or PDFs. I may have left some off, but those are some of the more popular areas. And you have to think, all right, what is the most important? Aside from, obviously, the main photo, the options, and the add to cart button, what are the other kind of ancillary, secondary elements that we need to make use of? And you remember the old tenet that we first started off with. People read left to right and then top to bottom. And taking that into account, you have to ascribe each of these areas in order. And from a sizing order, from a literal order, you have to think about all of that when looking at a proper layout, especially when considering responsive design, right, JT? If you just say it's all important, we have a problem, right? Something has got to give. Something has got to be more important than others, and sometimes it has to be below the fold. What are your thoughts, JT, on these?
Yeah, no, I think these are all good, and kind of keeping that in mind with responsive, we try to stick, especially on the item page, we're talking about removing the left nav, not having that right column. Once we look at another item page, we kind of point it out, but having that two columns, where that left column is the one where it's more the product image and that right column is more the buy box. That's the most important element on the page, kind of keep that, clean, nicely laid out up top and not crowd that around it. So any of these other secondary kind of ancillary elements, push those further down below that section.
One thing I'll say, we don't have a slide for this, but one thing I would say too that I think is a really good takeaway for the audience is if you have some of those unique selling propositions, the USPs that we referenced earlier, and it's specific to, let's say, shipping, or you get a scarf with every order or whatever it is. Yeah. I always like scarves with every order. I don't know where that came from. But if you've got basically a value add, that's always well placed adjacent to the add to cart button. So when you put something near the almighty add to cart, give it some love. Say if you click this, if you add to cart, you're also going to get this. You're going to get this level of service. You'll get the scarf, whatever it is. And it's just an incentive to click that button. I'm a big fan of that. Some of the testings we've done, even with exclusive concepts, has borne that out. So I think that's a good takeaway. So let's go to the great tab debate. To tab or not to tab? Don, that is the question. Don, give us an answer.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I personally, tabs are one of those, love-hate relationships for me. I think one of the things that people don't understand about tabs, they think they just put a bunch of tabs, they put a lot of info, and be great for people. One thing for an SEO perspective that people don't realize is that Google does not give as much weight to all of the data in all the tabs except the initially visible one.
Right.
The initially visible one gets the bulk of your value. So when you go, oh, I'm going to put a whole bunch of extra content and all these extra tabs, and it'll be great for SEO. I'm not going to say it doesn't have some value, but it has noticeably less value. And there are things like product reviews. When the review markup that Google wants to show up in rich snippets and things like this is in a tab, it will not show up in search results because it's not immediately visible. So one of the things that we've done for some stores is actually giving what I call pseudo tabs. There's probably a better name for it, where you give a tab-like look to the top, and all it does is scroll down the page. You basically made a longer page with sections for these individual things. So the big thing is figuring out what is the point of your tabs, and are people going to use them. I would also tend to say, when possible, set up Google Analytics to track, are people actually ever clicking on these other tabs? Because you may be cluttering it up with a bunch of stuff and making people read through that people are never touching. So should you tab or should you not? It's going to be a store decision, but certainly there's a lot of things to think about the real value you're providing for it.
Don, there are a lot of merchants.
Right there.
Yeah, there's a lot of merchants that I've spoken to that have called and said, I get so frustrated when I have something, a tab, and they call up our customer service line, and they'll say, where are the specs, or where is the guarantee, or whatever it is, where's the PDF downloads, and it's in the tabs. They get so frustrated when they say, I don't understand why the customer's not clicking on it. It's right here. And it goes back to one of the first tenets that we covered is don't assume that somebody knows exactly where it is. And if you have an inordinate amount of information, like we showed the Crutchfield example on the previous slide, if you have an inordinate amount of information, it just swamps the page. You have to kind of toe the line between if you want to show all that on the page at once, but look at the great Amazon, right? I mean, Amazon has product pages that are taller, used to people scrolling through all that information. I'm much more of a fan of showing no tabs. I'm not saying that's all the case. We just did 2 or 3 sites with tabs, so it is a case-by-case basis that you need to evaluate it on. But let's talk about when not to tab. And Don, is there anything else that we didn't cover here? Did you cover already, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it right on. I mean, a lot of people are used to scrolling now. I'm not saying the add to cart obviously you want to keep up high, but when you're getting all this extra information, making people scroll is actually a lot of times easier, and a lot of people are more used to it. Like you've got listed here on the bullets, some people will put accessories and things like this in a tab, and very few people are going to click through and either see it or buy those because they're just not going to go there. They're usually, when they're looking at a tab, they're looking for something in particular trying to find, And so the more you can make it immediately visible is good. Most of this rest you've got listed, we already talked about the SEO value, the less text that frankly a lot of people just don't click on tabs, but they will scroll. So there are a lot of people that frankly, if you had a tab and you had more information below, they would not click on the tab, but they would see the stuff below the tabs because they would have scrolled down. So,
right. Don, look at the fourth bullet point there that I put, bearing required accessories to purchase. I see that a lot. I see a lot of required accessories that have that little add to cart button there. But do you agree that the multi-add to cart is probably the best way to put those required accessories versus just bearing in a tab? What do you think?
Oh, I would not put them in a tab for the life of me. I put that pretty straightforward there. I would certainly, do a multi-add to cart. You can make it simple. You can highlight that these are what they need, or at least that they would want. You're buying something that takes batteries. Throw a battery on there as a an add-on. It's a quick. We'll make them check off the box, and it's done.
Right. Well, one thing real quick, we need to get to checkout here in a second. One last thing you have to consider when evaluating for a responsive design is that you have a very clear width restriction when it comes to a mobile device. And so in other words, you can't put 7 tabs on a mobile device. So if you look at Crutchfield, they actually had, I think, 7 or 8 in there. But what they've done on the mobile device is they show the first 1 or 2 tabs, and everything else is sandwiched between another flyout where you can get that. So it's a pretty clever way to going about tabs for a mobile device. You might want to pull that up on your mobile site to see how they accomplish that for tabs. But something to consider.